Hey everyone, Curse Deck Builder here, making our way to 10,000 decks assisted, and here we are with Minthara Merciless Soul, an Orzhov Aristocrats experience deck. This is the commander I've always liked, so I'm really excited to see it on my plate. And this deck comes to us from Jay, who says, playtesting this deck and playing it versus people feels like all the games lead to wildly different experiences. Not necessarily a mana issue, but it feels awkward. Don't know if I just need to change what I mulligan for, or mulligan more aggressively, or what. And in terms of restrictions, they have none. Absolutely, I can see definitely some directions we can work on, and definitely some things we can improve in the deck, so thank you so much, Jay, for sending the deck. And let's get right into it. I love this commander, and I'm excited to talk about her. If you'd like to take a look at the deck list we're talking about today, or if you'd like to submit your own deck list to me so that I can make a video assisting your deck, please check the video description down below. So who is Minthara Merciless Soul, and what do they provide to us as an aristocrat commander? Well, there are 4 mana 2/2 Elf Cleric. They have 3 main abilities, all that have to do with experience counters. They have Ward X, where X is the number of experience counters you have, which is funny that's at the top. I think that's just how, you know, we put the like ward, flying, all that stuff at the top, but how we get those experience counters is actually in the middle. At the beginning of your end step, if a permanent you controlled left the battlefield this turn, you get an experience counter. And then finally, creatures you control have +1/+0 for each experience counter you have. Now, this is a very straightforward kind of commander. Experience counters are something that is shared throughout a bunch of the colors, but Mardu seems to have the biggest collection. I don't know how that ended up being that way, but I think it is very interesting. So we have in black-white, I believe, 2 commanders, the other one in the deck as well, that give you experience counters. As we trigger Minthara and we get more experience counters, they become more difficult to interact with the target removal, and your creatures get stronger and stronger. Of course, experience counters are, I'm pretty sure, impossible to remove, and because of that, every time Minthara goes to the command zone and you bring them back, the boost still stays around, which is really, really cool. And so over the game, you are just improving your army more and more. That being said, it does make us a little reliant on our commander, which is somewhat, you know, balanced out by the fact that Aristocrats is just a very, very strong deck by itself and needs, you know, not a crazy amount of support to be good. Let's take a look at the deck itself. And generally, I am a fan of it, but as we scroll, we see the land and we scroll down to the mana value. You know, viewers know exactly the things I'm going to point out. First of all, 35 lands does feel a little low for a deck of this mana curve, I would say. It's not a quantifiable thing. Of this kind of curve that it has, I would like maybe 2 more lands, maybe 3, go to 37, 38. Black-white has quite a bit of good draw and some mana generation, but it tends to be later game, or it tends to be very specific, such as using, even Ashnod's Altar is not actually in here. I haven't suggested it, but still, using Ashnod Altar effects, using black market effects, using treasure tokens, making some mana isn't too difficult, but it's definitely in the mid game. Likewise, we have really good card draw in the colors, but its consistency is low and there is a lot of card draw missing, which we will get to. So with all that in mind, I wouldn't mind adding a few lands, bringing it to 37, 38. And then coming to, you know, the curve here, we can see we have a nice little go up to 2 mana and then a bump here around 5, and even 4 seems a little high, knowing that our commander is, you know, 4 mana herself. I think they're a lady. I'm not actually sure. But with that in mind, you know, I believe they're in Baldur's Gate 3. I've been putting off playing that game, and I know I'm supposed to, so I guess I'll find out soon. But this entire section just feels a little too much, and therein I'm going to put my thesis statement for this deck. I like the deck, I like where it's going, but it feels very bulky on the 4-5 mana side, and it feels very much so not being able to get there with the lack of mana and the lack of card draw. So I can see the problem with this deck, that we have a very, very, you know, consistent start, and then we just hit a wall. Excuse me, we hit a wall where a lot of our cards require way more mana than we just practically have. And after turn of just drawing those those high mana cards, they're just going to rot in our hand, and we're going to lose that initial kind of power that we have early in the game and then fall behind. So let's specifically go through our 4 and 5 mana creatures, because everything else I'm generally fine with. I like the artifacts, I like the instants, I like the sorceries. I think generally, I will say it does feel like playing Cleansing Nova feels a little excessive. We have both Tragic Arrogance and Toxic Deluge, which are 2 very, very good board clears. So if this was a 4 mana with Wrath of God or Damnation or Damn, because we are in the colors of Damn, I think this would be a little better. But let's get to the bulk of it. Let's go through our 4 to 5 mana cards. I will very briefly look again if there's any 3 to 2 mana cards before I get there. And I will say something that does catch my eye is the Flesh Carver. I recognize that Flesh Carver is a power-based sacrifice card, and I do like that. I will say I preferred if it made more horror creatures. Like, we can look up here and we can see Nested Shambler works a lot better with our commander because it splits into that many squirrels equal to its power, and each of them will get that experience counter bonus, which makes them very, very dangerous. Whereas, not Demon's Disciple, where were you? Flesh Carver creates one really big creature, which though is impressive, just doesn't feel particularly strong. It's like this creature has almost like Undying or something. It dies and you get a version of it that's actually worse than its original version because it lacks Intimidate or the activated ability. So this feels a little weak and I would like to cut it. I think that's generally it. So let's just... Creature or yourself. Okay, sorry, I had to reread that. I was like, does that work with experience counters? Okay, so starting at 4 mana, we've got Baron Bertram Greywater. This is basically whenever a creature dies that is not a token, you create a token creature, a 1/1 vampire, and then it has an activated ability for sacrifice. I think this is just a little not great. If this creature was at 3 mana and maybe lower power or toughness, I would be a lot more for it, but at the moment it's just kind of clunky. Don't get me wrong, it's nice that this works really well with a series of our creatures, but at the same time I think I'd much rather it be something like Pawn of Ulamog, which is a 3 mana creature that does the same thing. It's just literally the 4 mana aspect of this card I don't particularly like. Disciple of Bolas is great, no complaints. Elandra I like as well, works once again with the power, so I think this is fine. She's still a little clunky, but at the same time I don't mind with the amount of sack outlets that we have. This is much, much stronger than Baron Bertram, who is just hanging out over there, so I do prefer it. Ravenous Chupacabra feels weak for this deck, honestly. You have such better removal. You have both like sacrifice outlets and pressure. You have free removal. You have path. You have swords. So having a 4 mana creature who just comes in and destroys a creature your opponents control and not exile or sacrifice or anything just feels really clunky in comparison to everything else. So for me, it's an easy cut. Shadowheart. I like Shadowheart, but Shadowheart feels like your second Bolas's Disciple, and much, much worse because of it. Like, I think this is outclassed by a lot of your other card draw, specifically things like your Skull Clamp and where is it? Just the Disciple of Bolas. So though I do see this being like really, really strong, it's also just kind of clunky at the speed it goes. I think I might prefer some other options for card draw with sacrifice, even things just like, you know, Village Rites, which is 1 black mana to sacrifice a creature, draw 2. I just like it being instantaneous and not so much at 4 mana, waiting a turn cycle and paying another 2 mana to, yes, draw like 4 or 5 cards, but the delay of it, I guess actually that solved it for me. Would you pay 6 mana to draw 5 cards? I wouldn't, honestly. Not in a deck at this power level. I think I would pay, you know, Necropotence or, you know, Village Rites 1 mana for 2 cards, but I wouldn't pay 6 mana for 4 or 5 cards. Now, would I pay 8 mana for 9 to 10? Probably that's getting better, but the chances of getting several activations out of this creature I think are pretty low. So I'm not very hot on it, but perhaps it is something you might want to keep, so I'll leave it. I wonder if this is D&D, so the symbol probably means something, but it reminds me a lot of the Orzhov symbol, which I think is rather cute here. Solemn Simulacrum is a card that is no longer strong enough for EDH if you are not abusing it. And to abuse Solemn Simulacrum, you have to abuse its ETBs by blinking. You have to reanimate it repeatedly, abusing both of its abilities, or you have to abuse the fact that it is an artifact and cheat it into play for much cheaper. This deck is not doing any of those 3. You could say that with some reanimation, we could possibly, make the most of it, but I don't think right here is where we want to be, so it's a very easy cut. This would just better off if you want the mana ramp, play Arcane Signet, Felwar, you have the Arcane Signet, so Felwar Stone or Orzhov Signet, you will just have a better time. Actually, Talisman of Hierarchy would probably be much better. Yogg is very, very strong, free, quote-unquote, sacrifice outlet, proliferate, fantastic card, absolutely belongs here. We're going into 5 mana, and here in 5 mana, I think I'm going to have a few more problems because 5 mana in Aristocrat decks is a lot of mana. To think about it in a way, this is the kind of card, at 5 mana, you could be casting like Blood Artist, and you could, or like Zulaport Cutthroat, and like, I don't even know if you're playing, what is it? Bastion of Remembrance. Which I actually didn't suggest. I should probably suggest those cards in a second, but you could play both Zulaport Cutthroat and Bastion of Remembrance for 5 mana, and those cards will basically double the damage you do with sacrifices, make them very dangerous. Bastion creates a 1/1 that could be like a 3/1, 4/1 with experience counters. The bar is really high for 5 mana cards, especially 5 mana cards that don't immediately do something. So Carmen I do like because she represents such a large spike in power immediately by growing her just like to a dramatic state by sacrificing 3, 4, 5, 6 creatures. She's a very big flyer and does a lot of damage. But her trigger is an attack trigger, so all she kind of is a very bad version of Mazarek, and honestly just kind of a beater. And this is the kind of deck that wants to be a beater. You're not really capitalizing the fact that you are gaining life. She doesn't really play well with experience counters because she herself is just really, really strong. Like we can say, well, Curse, the experience counters allow her to reanimate bigger and bigger creatures, but the majority of our creatures are pretty small. And if we're saying our biggest creature is 7 mana, which we'll get to, she needs what? What's easier to do? Sacrifice, like if you sacrifice like 4 or 5 creatures, you will have enough power to reanimate that, and the experience counters, which might be 3 or 4, won't matter as much as the +1/+1 counters she naturally gets. So the interplay with your commander isn't that great. I'm generally just not impressed with this card. I think as a commander, she's not that bad, but as a utility creature, she is kind of weaker, or a finisher creature, she's very weak. Cavalier of Dawn likewise feels very, very straightforwardly clunky. I do appreciate that you can destroy any permanent into a 3/3, but at this point, why not play Stroke of Midnight? Why not play a number of other creatures? What is it? Generous Gift, or sorry, I meant spells, not creatures. You're even playing up here Rite of Oblivion, which I think is just superior. So this just ends up being kind of a clunky creature that doesn't really do much for you, and though it's nice to get an artifact or enchantment card back, I don't really think it's what you want to do. Gulakal Urgisa is a card I love, works really, really well with our commander. She is a little clunky because she needs a full untap phase in order to make the most of her, but otherwise I do really like her, and I think at this power level she's very appropriate. Just a very, very fun card, and plays very well with your commander. Guardian Scale Lord is interesting. Once again, I feel like we do not mill ourselves enough for this to matter. However, I do like the fact that you instantly get this ability. I feel like this is just much stronger Carmen in a lot of ways, like it reanimates permanents, it works instantly, it works well with your commander because the Scale Lord doesn't scale. Oh, that was unintended, but doesn't scale itself. You know, it doesn't grow by itself. It requires those experience counters. So I like this a lot more. I think this is fine. It is reliant on having another creature. Otherwise, you are just playing this card, upticking it and waiting a turn. But if you have at least one other creature and your commander out for the experience counters, I think it's very, very good. Overall, just a fine card. Gulping Scrap Trap is a terrible proliferate. It is very, very bad, and I'm going to suggest better ones, so cut this very easily. Junji the Midnight Sky, likewise, just a clunky card. You have to pay 5 mana, and then you have to kill it to get these triggers. Don't get me wrong, both reanimation and the discard are really, really good swings, but without ability to repeatedly reanimate, without, you know, Undying Evil effects or Not Dead After All effects, Junji is just very, very clunky and is a lot of mana to just put into the graveyard. It basically becomes a sorcery spell when you want that effect immediately, which that first effect you often do. So I don't think it particularly belongs here, unfortunately. Karmic Guide, on the other hand, is a fantastic card that I never have enough of. I really do like her if you can play her with the combo, which is the Elemental from Lorwyn. You'll have to excuse me, I'm trying to remember what it's called. It evades me. Regardless, there's a 2-card combo with a Sack Outlet, Karmic Guide, and that other creature, and a Blood Artist makes an infinite amount of sacks, and all of a sudden you win the game. I don't believe you're playing that card. You are not. So Karmic Guide is not as strong, but still okay. Playing Karmic Guide and reanimating creature, letting Karmic Guide die, and then later reanimating the Karmic Guide to get another creature reanimated is still pretty good value plays. It's still a little clunky here, don't get me wrong, but honestly not a bad creature, so I'm not going to be too hard on it. Lisa or Liesa, I've heard both. She is good. Once again, feels a little clunky, but I don't mind the fact that you can immediately trigger her. She's at 5 mana, she's a 4/5. Make sure to make the most of her triggers by sacrificing as many creatures as you can when she comes out. Otherwise, she's just kind of sitting around as anti-board wipe protection, and that's not really how you want to use her, I would say. If you're just playing her and saying, haha, you can't wipe the board, you should probably be playing something like Selfless Spirit instead. The exile on your opponent's creatures is nice, but at 5 mana, it might be a little too late, or it might just, you know, not hate the right decks, because reanimation decks these days don't often kill things from their board, they put it from their deck. Coming to the end, we've got our very high mana cards. We have Nadir, that grows as creatures dies, and then creates 1/1s equal to its power. Now, I'm going to do just a side-by-side comparison between, I hope I'm saying Nadir right, and Nested Shambler. And therein is the problem. These two cards are almost identical, and one is 6 times the mana of the other. Now, I know what you're saying. Hey, Cursed, this creature also grows, so you aren't completely dependent on your commander, you know, buffing up the power. Or you might say, well, Curse, this creature comes as a 3/3, so at least we'll always create 3 creatures as opposed to just creating 1. And with that in mind, I'll say, yeah, but that's not good enough. That is not 6 times the power of Nested Shambler. Nested Shambler comes out, you can, you know, time it at 1 mana to ensure that your commander's out, use instant speed removal, and make what, like 5/5/1s immediately. And I think that's just dramatically stronger than a 6 mana card that does the same thing. So very, very easy cut. Finally, we end with Threefold Thunder Hulk, a card that is just one of those cards that are printed these days that like tire me out when I'm reading them. Maybe this is just a dumb thing to say as a Magic player, but I do feel sometimes like the cards have too much text. Like, I don't know, maybe this is just me, and maybe it's just a skill issue, but this card has so much text that it just really doesn't need to have. And if we lost like 1 or 2 of these lines, or powered down 1 or 2 of these lines, I think it would be costing a lot less mana. The problem is just the same as the one before. This is a 7 mana creature that generates tokens based on its power. However, I like this a lot more as it is an ETB or attack, aka a Titan ability, makes it a lot better. However, the speed of this creature is held back by the fact that if this is on the stack, your opponents will most likely try to kill your commander, which I will say is counteracted by the ward. This is close. 7 mana is a lot. It is difficult to cheat this card out in this deck because you don't have means to put it into your graveyard naturally, and therefore will have to cast it the first time. And with that in mind, I'm going to say this is mid. I think it's very strong when you get it out, but without enough mana to genuinely get it out, I think you're going to not feel its power. But when you do get it out, your commander is out, it is very strong. That being said, that does fall pretty firmly into win more for me, where we go, what are the things we need to make this card strong? Well, we need to be ahead because we need to have cards that both we need like sack outlets or other ways to use all these triggers, but we also need 7 mana, so we need to be ahead, and we also need to have our commander out, and our commander needs to have enough experience counters. I'm putting my hand to, I'm counting with my hand. I just looked at the camera foolishly. So all of these hoops you have to jump through to generate a bunch of creatures that die to a board clear, that your deck is already weak to board clears because of how your commander works. And so the other thing to stop that is to have a Blood Artist and a sack out. Like, do you see what I mean? It's just so many things you need to have going in order for this card to be good. Makes me very disinterested in this card. That being said, it's not the worst. Okay, with that, I'm going to go into my additions. I'm checking if there's anything else I want to talk about. I'm not too impressed with the Swords of, but they aren't egregious to me, so I'm just going to keep going. While we're here, I will note the extra cards we are missing, which would be Bastion of Remembrance, a card. Sparkle is a little slow today, so I might just use the names as opposed to... Yeah, I don't quite understand why. Okay, Bastion of Remembrance is a... Oh, I also misspelled it. I feel like this. It's like when you expect a call, so you take a shower. Like the second you're busy or you start moving on, the thing does. So I'm just going to start describing Bastion of Remembrance. It is a 3-mana enchantment that creates a 1/1 human on ETB, and whenever a creature you control dies, your opponents are drained. That is a Blood Artist effect or Zulaport Artist effect that I particularly like. I'm going to add another one in my additions, but another one that could be worth considering would be the Cruel, my goodness, I'm so sorry, I don't remember what it is. Cruel something, a 2-mana, there it is, Cruel Celebrant. Now it's working faster. Cruel Celebrant is a 2-mana one in black and white, that's very good. And I would say Vindictive Vampire, if you want to go into a higher mana card. Vindictive Vampire is the same text at 4 mana, I believe for a 2/3, that'll be the question for it. But all of these creatures are pretty much staples of Blood Artist or Aristocrat decks in white-black, where it just turns all of your creatures as they die into drains across the board, across your opponents. So I find that these, 2/3, I find these to be particularly strong, and you are missing out by not playing them. They do get better in multiples, and they work very well with your commander. Let's go into other additions. Proliferate. I am adding 1 or 2 cards with Proliferate. I think 3 here. And I think... So, you have a few Proliferate cards. I am going to heavily recommend more. There is something I like to call the Proliferate test that I've done and I've talked about on a few of my videos, and I will reiterate it here. The idea with Proliferate is the value of the Proliferate is directly connected to the difficulty to add a counter to that permanent. So proliferating +1/+1 counters often isn't particularly good unless you have an entire board of +1/+1 counters or a bunch of creatures that get amazing triggers off having those added to them, because generally putting +1/+1 counters is really easy. However, on the other hand, experience counters in this deck are very difficult to put on. They have a very easy trigger if a permanent you controlled left the battlefield, but they have a beginning of your end step. You'll have to excuse me, there's a dog outside. I don't know if you can hear. The beginning of your end step makes this ability only trigger once per turn cycle. And this ability, or these experience counters, are very, very valuable to you. So think about it as each proliferation is the equivalent of having another end step. That is something that's incredibly difficult to get in Magic, so having this is just dramatically powerful. So with that in mind, I don't mind having a few extra versions. Whispers of the Dross is really easy at 1 mana. It will kill creatures, so that is impressive. And getting another proliferate is good. Drown and Ichor is like its big brother or big sister at giving -4/-4 for double the mana at sorcery speed. Still pretty good. I think it's still worth running. But the main one, and the one I always get behind, is Filigree Vector. Filigree Vector is a card I am always impressed with, and I cannot ever tell you how much I advocate for this card. It comes in, it will put +1/+1 counters on all your creatures, and later you can sacrifice other artifacts to proliferate. Now, the first ability already intrinsically works really, really well with your deck because you like going wide, but then you do have a number of ways of creating artifacts. Clue tokens is one of them. I've seen a few others. Getting a proliferate out of them is pretty good, especially if you go a little further into treasure tokens, which we'll get into, or other artifact synergies. Filigree Vector gets better and better. And, you know, the floor of this card is rather good to begin with, so I think that's rather impressive. This is kind of in the middle as a finisher. I probably should have put this at the end, but it is a card I really do want to suggest. One of the things that you might find as a problem is that you will have tons and tons of creatures and kind of lacking evasion. Now, Menace is not the perfect evasion. It is just basically forcing double blocks, but when your creatures have very high power and you have a lot of them, forcing double blocks is basically trading each of your tokens for 2 other creatures, or on some boards just making them straight unblockable, which is very, very good. So 2 mana, make your entire, your entire board unblockable to an extent is very, very strong, but that other line of text, which all of a sudden those creatures will now start exiling and basically drawing off your opponent's deck, is just gravy to an otherwise very, very good card. I think this will let you not only have really good mid-game plays, but finish games against opponents who have very low creature count, or are very susceptible to Menace and have to trade their entire board in order to stay alive. So, very good card that used to be $5-10 when, and I could be wrong about that. I was pretty sure it was a few dollars. Maybe it was hard to find, but it was definitely more expensive. And then through a printing that just happened, I believe it has gone down in price. It's just a very impressive card that I do really like. Yes. I never came back and fixed this. Not Dead After All. So I wanted to talk very briefly about the Undying Evil and the Not Dead After All effects. I cannot... It'll take a second to load. So in the meantime, I think I have one right here. All that just for it to go through. That's strange. I've been working on it. There we go. Here's the copy. I was gonna hold it up, but here we are with Not Dead After All. So I really like these Undying Evil, Undying Malice, Not Dead After All effects as a 1 or 2 of in Aristocrats or Sacrifice decks with black in them. Not Dead After All is just very, very good and synergizes with what I would say is a lot of our deck. A lot of +1/+1 counters, a lot of ETBs. I guess the +1/+1 counters not so much. Sorry, I'm thinking in the wrong direction. But cards like Plaguecrafter, cards like, where are we? Actually, I mean Cathar Commando, but also Knight of the White Orchid. This is something that actually does work with Solemn Simulacrum rather well. Works really well with Karmic Guide. It works really well with cards like Threefold Thunder Hulk. Just cards that allow us to buy back our creatures instantly and get another trigger out, especially with our Sack Owlets that we have a lot of. And it does protect our commander pretty well. I just played a game on Mudsta's channel where I used it to protect my Brina through a board clear that allowed me to make the most of a few extra attacks. I think I lost the commander right after anyways, but a very nice protection spell. That being said, also, Not Dead After All has just very good synergy in multiplayer. Getting an extra ping across the board is very good in Aristocrat decks where you are chipping away at your opponent's health. A card that really caught my eye is Carrion. So Carrion, I think, is really interesting because one of the things I was complaining about cards like Nadir or the Threefold Thunderhulk is the sheer mana cost of an ability attached to a creature that just doesn't need to cost that much because of other bells and whistles it has. Carrion, much like our Nested Shambler, is much cheaper. Carrion is 3 mana, but you pick a creature and you divide it into 0/1 insect tokens. Pretty horrific art, honestly, but I do particularly like it. Very green-black to the extent that I think this card was also turned into a green-black card for 2 mana at instant speed, sacrifice a creature, make that many pests, but unfortunately we can't play that. But in black-white, we can play Carrion. And what's really nice is this can be just any creature, right? We can use this to turn if someone is destroying our commander, we turn it into a bunch of creatures and get a little bit of benefit from it. We can use it on any creature that has grown and any creature that gets the bonus from our commander and experience counters. Just as everything else, this immediately turns into a bunch of creatures that are affected by those experience counters, which is really nice. That being said, they are a touch weaker with 1 less power, but I don't think you're going to notice. I will say this will also work really well in the turns that you're just trying to finish the game, where you have 1 or 2 Blood Artist effects or Zulaport Cutthroat effects, a sack outlet, and 1 big or decently big creature. You can turn, let's say it's a 4 power creature, you can turn that into 1 sacrifice and then 4 additional sacrifices after that, which is 6 triggers, and if you have 2 effects, what is that, 12 damage to each opponent, 36 damage just out of this card. Very impressive, very good. You don't need to know the math. This is a fantastic card. Another power cares into tokens card that I think you should definitely be playing is Ruthless Technomancer. This is definitely Bolas's Disciples like cousin, which is much better in a lot of boards because not only does it create tokens, which is nice, but it also comes with an activated ability to reanimate targets. It's a little clunky sometimes, it feels, but with certain creatures, such as the Nested Chandler, it's actually insanely powerful. If you have a ton of mana, you can play this, sacrifice the Nested Chandler with the experience counters buffing it, making a bunch of creatures, pay 3 mana, sacrifice a treasure, put it back on the battlefield, sacrifice it to something else, and ad nauseum just keep generating a giant board. Very impressive. And while we're here, I will say, because I didn't get to it, Ashnod's Altar is a particularly good card you should play. Coming to the end, I think this is our last card, and it is Sir Conrad the Grim. This is just notably missing in your deck. This is a very powerful card, an insanely powerful card, I would say, and definitely kind of the win condition in a lot of Aristocrats decks. I don't see any reason for you not to be playing it as one of your top end cards, because this, plus enough sacrifice outlets, sacrifice creatures, and other Blood Artist effects is instantly winning the game. In fact, you can just put this out there and just kind of leave it out and do a bunch of combat, holding up mana to dump into it when you need to do damage, and your opponents will be kind of jumping over themselves trying to remove this creature. So that's always, to me, an indicator of its power, and I do like it. Oh, last thing I wanted to say. This is kind of the boring part where I say I would like you to play more card draw. Phyrexian Arena, Stein and Blood, Knight's Whisper are the ones that really catch my eye here. You have a lot of card draw that is dependent on your board, and less so card draw that just works no matter what. Read the Bones is good. Somewhere in here, I did a weird search to find these, but somewhere in here is Rowan's Grim Search, which can work really well with your deck because of the tokens. But I will also say Plum the Forbidden is also very strong here. Even if it is dependent on your board, it is a immensely powerful sack outlet and is like really good anti board clear strategy where you turn your board into card draw. And unlike a lot of these effects, it cannot be thwarted by a singular card counterspell, right? A lot of these kind of like, oh, your board is dead, you know, draw a card for each creature that died are one singular spells, whereas Plumb the Forbidden spreads that out as it is copied every time you sacrifice an additional creature, which makes it very, very, very good. I will note there is life loss, but hey, this is where we're at. We're in black. We're gonna love it. Not even including the fact that as you sacrifice creatures, you might get Blood Artist triggers that will counteract or even put you further ahead in life. And with that, oh, no, I had one more. What I love Aristocrats. Man, I gotta make that Aristocrats video. But till then, my favorite card to suggest in Black-White Aristocrats is Jailbreak. Oftentimes, your deck is like very much so powered up by getting just one additional sacrifice trigger, one additional ETB trigger, or having one additional Blood Artist effect. And Jailbreak is an incredibly affordable ability that trades giving your opponent a card that you don't care about for you to be able to get a card that you do care about. If you play fetch lands, it is ramp in mono white, which is also very cool, but if you don't, it is generally just a fantastic card. I recommend 100% all the time this card. You will be impressed by it. It is good. And that's it. For real this time. That's it. Thank you so much, Jay, for sending the deck. I love this commander. I love Black-White Aristocrats, and I think you're on to something really good, and I hope my suggestions have been helpful. I think that's all I have to say, so happy deck building and good luck. Thank you so much for watching. This video is brought to you by viewers like you and people on my Patreon. If you'd like to send me another draft of this deck, or any deck, there is a link in the video description down below. And if you'd like to make your deck one of my donation decks I work on, there's a link there too. Finally, if you'd like to like, comment, subscribe, I would be very appreciative. It helps the channel quite a bit. Thank you and good luck in brewing and building.